Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we convene our fourth of 5 sessions on our program on Compassion 2.0. We've been contemplating what compassion means in a world of extremis. And today, we're going to hear from someone who approaches compassion and right living and flourishing from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective. So I thought I would begin our session today with a very brief contemplation of the great deity of compassion, Avalokiteshvara, known also in the Tibetan tradition as Chenrezig, known in the Chinese Buddhist tradition as Kuan Yin, a deity that shifts over time, both masculine and feminine, different guises, but always within the core principle, which is at the heart of the meaning of the name Avalokiteshvara, of God looking down on humanity with compassion. In all the traditions, there's a particular mantra that characterizes and distills what that means. And that is the great Tibetan mantra, Hindu mantra, Buddhist mantra, core mantra of the Dalai Lama tradition in Tibetan Buddhism, Om Mani Padme Hum. Although in Tibet they say it is Om Mani Padme Hum. The Padme is more the Sanskrit, the Peme is more the way the Tibetan cultural tradition has refined that particular word. That has been my personal mantra since I was a little boy. I received it at the age of 7 in Taiwan, where I was. And as soon as I heard the mantra uttered, I internalized it in my heart and my mind, even though I didn't even understand at that time what a mantra was. I knew that somehow it was something that I needed to cling to. As you may know from your general study of mantras, mantra means a sort of a tool for thinking. It's that which helps us through sound focus our attention, and the clarity and the sincerity with which the seeker embodies the sounds and orients one's consciousness around the syllables has an extraordinary effect on refining consciousness, healing us of various ailments, and enabling us most fundamentally this particular mantra in embodying the kind of compassion that is animated by the suffering of our fellow human beings, and indeed the suffering of all sentient life. And the Bodhisattva in the Buddhist tradition, Chenrezig or Avalokiteshvara, makes a vow not to enter into nirvana until everyone, all suffering, has been vanquished everywhere. Om is that sound that we all intuitively know as the sound of being itself. So when one starts, as many mantras do, with Om, one is opening oneself up to all that is. It is that initiation of a pathway of liberation. It is the sound that is not part of any tradition, but it's a sound that is held by all the Asian traditions in particular as that frequency of being that brings one into harmony with all that is. Mani is the diamond scepter, the Vajra, if you know that particular instrument and sacred relic in the Asian traditions. And it symbolizes what takes place in the psyche, what takes place in the consciousness of a seeker who has opened themselves up with the Om, that unitive state understands that there's no separate self, that everything in the manifest world, everything in the unmanifest world is one continuum without boundaries. And that therefore the Mani is symbolized by the philosopher's stone, by that alchemical process that begins to break down the illusion of the separate self, that begins through the breaking down of illusion to generate the creative impulse that allows one, enables one to begin to even contemplate the expression of compassion in a suffering world. And out of that emerges the great Padma, the lotus blossom, roots in the mud, in the darkness, in the illusion, in the Maya, in the suffering. But because it's drawn, as we all are, in the innermost recesses of our beings, toward the light, toward compassion. That combination of the Om and the unitive, liberating impulse at the heart of who we are, and the creativity that begins to develop when we understand that there is no separate self and it's all one, begins to build in us like a lotus blossom, and it bursts forth in our hearts as compassion. And that image of the Buddha sitting on a lotus blossom in the middle of the pond distills both the quiescence of the refined mind, the philosopher's stone that knows no limitations because there's no boundaries. And it's out of that quiet that compassion blossoms. And that leads to the Hum. And even as the Om is the liberating impulse that embraces the infinite, the Hum is that final syllable that brings the infinite down into the mud again. It's the integration of everything that we become in our spiritual path into the manifest world. And you know, there's a very deep saying in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that they who worship the world live in darkness, but they who worship the infinite alone live in greater darkness. And it is not so much about the drop of our Atman dissolving into the vast ocean of Brahman, in the dissolution of the self that in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is the most fundamental truth. It's the way we open ourselves up through the Om Mani Padme Hum that allows the infinite to condense itself into the tiny little insignificant ephemeral drop of who we are in this incarnation. And that completion, that integration, that Om Mani Padme Hum distills, I think, one of the most sublime and profound notions of compassion in our world that's ever been intuited by the imagination of the human mind. So thank you, everyone, for joining Humanity Rising. And it's now my great pleasure to turn the program over to my very good friends and colleagues, Tom Eddington and Carson Kelly. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jim, for the opening comments. It's always a delight to come into the program not knowing what you're going to bring, what gifts, what insights, and I just love and appreciate what you shared before yesterday's broadcast and today's. Om Mani Padme Hum was the first mantra I was introduced to when I was introduced to Tibetan Buddhism, and it continues to be part of my daily practice. And it's one of many mantras that I recite on a daily basis as part of my practice. So thanks for the in-depth insight into the mantra. I'd like to welcome you all to day 4 of this extraordinary week on Compassion 2.0, and want to invite my good friend and colleague Carson Kelly into the conversation. As many of you have heard and seen, Carson is the founder of Compassion 2.0. He's doing some extraordinary work with a whole ecosystem of researchers, thinkers, leaders in the areas of compassion and flourishing. And I'll turn it over to you, Carson, and just welcome you to another wonderful day.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. Just also love to take a moment again and thank Jim for both his words. To your point, it's always such a gift to be able to say, okay, here we go, and then have the podcast or the broadcast start, and then Jim comes on, and yeah, it's fabulous. So thank you, Jim, for that. Also, thank you for and the team at Humanity Rising for the opportunity to invite me onto the podcast to share the work of Compassion 2.0. I have the great good fortune to be connected with some just truly incredible people, and to have the opportunity to make them available to others in the Humanity Rising community is something I very much appreciate. Also, I want to thank you too, Tom, for introducing me into Humanity Rising and for all of the work that you do and we are doing and will be doing together. I very much appreciate that too. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Carson Kelly, and I am the founder of Compassion 2.0, as Tom mentioned. Compassion 2.0 is a collection of professionals who are attempting to scale compassion through the intentional architecture of compassionate human experience that is both based on scientifically validated practices and interventions, and that can also be measured. We do this through the creation of compassionate and flourishing frameworks through both product development and organizational cultural architecture. The community consists of product leaders, developers, UX, UI designers, neuroscientists, behavioral scientists, people professionals, entrepreneurs, VCs, and a whole bunch more. And you can learn more about what we're doing at compassion2.com. So as per Jim's point, we are in day 4 of a week on what we're calling Compassion 2.0, the book club and blog club. And today we have a remarkable person that I am so very grateful to know, Scott Snibbe. Scott, if you'd like to join us, that'd be great. He's going to be talking to us about his book, How to Train a Happy Mind. So Scott, thank you for coming and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were talking a little bit earlier before we started the event around maybe your unique spiritual background. And so I thought we could just take a moment to have you introduce yourself and to the audience, just a little bit about, what you've done and how you've gotten here and how you've come to arrive to then write the book.
Sure. I also wanted to thank Jim. That was a really excellent talk on the compassion mantra. And it mentioned some things that are rarely talked about, is the connection between compassion and interdependence, which maybe we can talk about later in the interview. But if you get overloaded with compassion, you actually aren't that effective in life without the wisdom of understanding like the interdependence and cause and effect and reality. So it was a wonderful, very wise talk. Thank you, Jim. Okay, so how did my spiritual background,
Yeah.
very, very strange background that I'll abbreviate because I come from a Jewish family, actually Sephardic Jews who were kicked out of Spain in 1492. Um, and my parents, believe it or not, converted to become Christian scientists when I was after I was born. Because my mother had such an awful experience in the hospital in the 1969 when I was born, when they didn't have as many of the more compassionate ways of treating women in the hospital at the time. We'll leave it at that. And I grew up with that tradition, which it's mostly known for um, saying that you can heal yourself from any disease. But I think the bigger, which I don't completely adhere to, and I never joined the church because it was kind of obvious to me people were getting sick and dying all over the place, 100% death rate. So there was that funny Onion, the most popular Onion headline of all time is, death rate stubbornly holds at 100% despite scientists' best efforts. The truth of reality. So but I loved spirituality my whole life growing up. And I loved I even like snuck away to Sunday school. I went to Brown University and I would sneak away to Sunday school every Sunday just because I loved spirituality. But I came to Buddhism when I was about 30 years old. My brother introduced me to it. And I was a bit skeptical, actually. I was worried. My brother became a Buddhist. I was worried he would lose his personality by becoming Buddhist. Like, what does it mean to let go, get rid of yourself? Like, what's left? I thought. But I saw after a few years that he actually became more compassionate, more wise, and had all of his personality left. So I invited him to see the Dalai Lama, actually, because I saw the Dalai Lama was coming to LA. I said, "Oh, this should be fun. You love the Dalai Lama. I can sit through anything. It'll be fun for us as brothers." But then the instant I saw the Dalai Lama, I said, "I want what he's having," because I knew what he went through with the Tibetan people. It's like, other awful tragedies in the world today, like with Israel and Palestine and in Ukraine and Russia. Similar with China and Tibet, and 1 million Tibetans ended up dying because of that invasion. And yet, when I saw the Dalai Lama, he said, if we kill one Chinese person, that's a tragedy, like it will only create 100 enemies. And he wasn't deluded, he wasn't kind of a deluded Pollyanna. Like he understood the seriousness of that situation, but he actually remained constructive, had so much compassion for the country that invaded his and in many ways destroyed the culture of genocide. And so I thought, I want what he's having. I want that path to become that type of person that can really get through anything, and be a force for good in the world and have a happy mind. He was joyful, laughing, and so on. Anyway, I studied Tibetan Buddhism for 25 years now. I was invited to start teaching meditation 18 years ago. And what I found early on was that the way that traditionally Tibetan Buddhism is taught to beginners brings in 3 concepts that aren't part of our culture: karma, rebirth, and other realms. And so both with the encouragement of His Holiness, with a book like Beyond Religion that he wrote, and also with the encouragement of my teachers, I worked on refining this sequence that's called the Lam Rim, or Stages of the Path, of a 1,000-year-old, very refined sequence of how to distill the Buddhist teachings. And what I did is tried to work on fulfilling His Holiness's admonition to make that a secular path, something people can practice as authentically as possible, but not have to believe in the Buddhist worldview that can't currently be proven by science. And so I ended up writing this book, How to Train a Happy Mind, after testing it out for many years, the techniques. And His Holiness ended up writing a foreword to the book too, which was very nice.
Amazing.
So yeah, that's a very short summary of my spiritual life. Thanks for asking that question.
Oh, of course, it's fascinating. So tell us then, I guess most recently as a former book publisher, I kind of nerd out on the book industry. So I'm kind of curious to know, you've been promoting the book. I keep seeing beautiful pictures of you with amazing people talking about the book. How goes the book release?
It's great. It's fantastic. It's not a book that had I chose to work with a small publisher because I just loved the editor. The editor just really understood it and helped to make it suit a general audience more. So I worked with a smaller publisher than a bigger one. So I'm not on, Good Morning America or anything. But the book it went into a second printing before it was released, which is good. So there was some interest. And the main thing is getting nice, emails and feedback from people about the book, and seeing the reviews, coming in on Amazon and other places. But yeah, it seems to be really it fills a hole in the world in introducing a form of meditation that very few people are familiar with called analytical meditation. And it's almost the opposite of what people think meditation is. It's a meditation that is like it's like listening to a story, watching TV, listening to a podcast. It's very active, very very. It can be very beautiful. A simple definition of it is thoughts that bring out your best qualities. This type of meditation. And so that's been really gratifying because for so many people, it's a brand new idea that there is such a thing as analytical meditation, a meditation that is critical, constructive storytelling. It's also a lot easier for many people to practice because it's constantly changing rather than, trying to focus on your breath, which is very, very difficult. Although you need to complement both these type of meditations. So yeah, it's been fun traveling around doing book events, getting feedback. Yeah, so it seems to be doing well. And the book doesn't rely on any, specific current events. So I think like it will continue to just um, grow an audience over time. But yeah, as far as I can tell, it's doing well. I actually love how slowly book publishing works. It takes years to publish a book. And then I won't even get my first statement on how it's sold until September or something. Because it's all these different, it's electronic, ebook, it's audiobook. It's also the print book. Oh, and it's out in a couple of different languages too. It's the German version. Oh, I have the German version, which is quite cool, called Erleuchtung für Skeptiker. Here it is. The German version is out.
That's
And
cool.
a,
That's
and a
great.
Vietnamese version's coming out, and an Indian English version I found out was just sold. So all these signs are good. And people also have been contacting me saying, "Oh, I bought 3, 4, 5 copies for friends." So yeah, a lot of good signal that the book is beneficial, which was I had hoped for.
That's great. Well, congrats on all of that marketplace activity. And as you said, the signal of it's being beneficial. That's a fabulous way to think about it. Tell the audience, just unpack a little bit more about the difference between, say, analytical meditation and other meditation, and start to set the stage about and walk us through, the book itself and how it's different.
Yeah, sure. So the type of meditation most people are familiar with, we call mindfulness meditation. And that you can say maps to what we in Tibetan Buddhism call stabilizing meditation. So meditation whose purpose is to focus your mind. Without focus, you really can't do anything. You can't even do your job, much less meditate without you can't have a conversation. So it's a basic skill like we need to survive as human beings. It's focus, or animals too. So that type of meditation generally focuses on one object, which is typically your breath. And what it does for you, it trains your concentration. It also generally makes you less reactive. So you train yourself to watch what happens in your mind, and then ideally have a choice as to how to react to it. Like, okay, you see, I'm getting angry. I can let that pass through. You start to see everything in your mind changes. So you can say, oh, well, I'm getting angry, but actually I could just let that pass by, and choose whether or not to respond to it. So that's a form of meditation. Most people think that's the only form of meditation that exists. This other form of meditation, analytical meditation, cultivates thoughts, feelings, emotions, stories, and critical thinking. So one of the first ways of just augmenting mindfulness with analytical meditation is actually to look at the thoughts that come into your mind and think, oh, is that harmful or is that helpful? That's like the absolute basis of analytical meditation is to realize that every thought conditions your mind. This is backed up by neuroplasticity too, right? Every time you have a thought, it increases your likelihood of having that thought again. And so the analytical meditation starts to gain control of that and to steer your mind toward virtue. One of the challenges with mindfulness is that it lacks an ethical dimension. It can have one, and many people do. But a good example of the challenge of only doing mindfulness practice is how the military uses meditation, US military. So on the one hand, they use mindfulness meditation to help people overcome PTSD, which is fantastic. On the other hand, they use it to train snipers to use the same mindfulness techniques we all know, so they don't shake when they're aiming their gun to shoot somebody. So it's an extreme example that you can use mindfulness to kill somebody. And you can argue whether, of course, there are times when in defense, you might need to do that. But still, using mindfulness to kill someone is a bit of an extreme use of that technique. So I like to mention that meditation isn't necessarily beneficial. You actually have to add that motivation. So that's actually the first step of an analytical meditation, is to have a motivation, a positive motivation. And you typically think, oh, may my meditation be of benefit to myself and to others, bring about a happy mind, better relationships, deeper relationships, and a better world. And I like to mention all those because a lot of people think meditation is just inward, maybe even a little bit selfish, or just for a kind of self-development, self-improvement regime. But really the purpose of meditation is definitely to make yourself happy and effective. Also to deepen your relationships. It's often not mentioned, from the Buddhist perspective, and to make a better world, to actually improve the world in whatever way we can.
That's all.
Maybe just picking up on that real quickly, Scott. You referenced before. I think about the two wings of the bird, the compassion and wisdom, and I'm wondering if you could speak a bit more, and if you've addressed that in your book or how you've addressed it in your book.
Yeah, I do. So, and this is great because I wanted to talk more about what Jim said, because Jim was just right on with talking about the importance of two of those. So in Tibetan Buddhism, they say there's two wings to the bird. Like imagine you're a bird, as a spiritual practitioner, and if you only have these two wings are called compassion and wisdom. Wisdom is many, many things, but in a deep sense, it's the wisdom Jim talks about, a wisdom of interdependence, a realizing that we're not separate. That's how I talk about it in the book, to be very, very practical. This is seen as the root delusion. Like the root of all our suffering is a sense of separateness, that you can only harm another person if you feel separate from them. You can only feel superior or inferior to another person if you feel separate from them. You can only harm our environment if you feel separate from it. People talk about going to visit nature. We are part of nature right now. You don't have to go outside. Like we are actually, and I think for many people hearing that, it might be the first time they've heard that. Like, oh yeah, I'm actually part of nature right now. It's not a place I visit just on the weekends. But you really need both. And again, Jim commented on that, but they're quite complementary, right? So compassion opens your heart to everyone. Compassion, the definition of compassion in Tibetan Buddhism, Buddhism in general, is wanting to take away others' suffering. So it's not just empathy. Empathy is actually very overwhelming, and so many people today are feeling that as they read the news. You read about, people being killed in various places today, and you feel empathy. You feel overwhelmed. That is well known, even in Tibetan, even for an advanced monk. If they only feel empathy, they get very sad, very overwhelmed, very depressed quickly. You really need to immediately transform that to compassion, which is like, I need to take this away. You can't be egomaniacal about it, like I'm definitely going to do this, but at least have that wish, like whatever tiny things I can do to the best of my ability, I would like to take that away. I would like to take, and you imagine it. You imagine all those people safe, secure in their homes in a country where they feel safe and they have secure borders and food and so on. So that's the compassion side. But then that's not enough, because you actually need to know how to achieve that, right? So and also it's quite common for people to practice compassion still with a sense of separateness. So even though it's fairly beneficial to feel compassion, if you still feel like I'm a separate me, feeling compassion for those separate people in, that other country somewhere, that's a wrong view. That's considered a misunderstanding in Buddhism. And you really need that sense of interdependence that we're not separate at all. There's so many different ways. Like, of course, you can look in very scientific ways of how humanity evolved. Like we're literally connected genetically and culturally and so on to other people. But also, just through an acknowledgement of universal human rights. That's how I've kind of taken a modern approach to the way Buddhism talks about interdependence. It's like we're not separate from other. Think about it. Every word we're speaking, we learned from someone else. Every part of our body came from someplace else. All of our success, everything. If you really start thinking about it, it's other people are responsible for everything in your life. Even the food we each ate this morning. Think of all the different people that are responsible for bringing that food to your table, even thousands of years of cultivating it. What I'm describing now are analytical meditations. They're ways of thinking of interdependence. But you see how thinking about interdependence then sparks compassion, because you realize how you have every single human being alive and whoever lived to thank for being alive and safe and being able to have a nice conversation with each other right now. So they're totally intertwined, compassion and interdependence, in ways that Jim talked about. But they're the two most advanced topics in Buddhism too. That's what's interesting. So I think that's a big part of the innovation of this book, is to really go back to the earlier stages that Buddhism says are essential to develop compassion and interdependence. They're the last stages of Buddhist practice. And if you just jump right into them, they often won't be effective without those the groundings, just like in any field.
Scott, can you further unpack just the nuance of what you mean by the separateness of compassion? Let me try that again. If people show up and they are in a separate frame, how compassion, when they are compassionate or feel compassion, that's not necessarily correct in the Buddhist frame, in terms of what you were suggesting. I guess my larger question is, underneath that is, in your mind, how do you define the difference between empathy, feelings of empathy, and feelings of compassion?
Okay. We'll start with that. So empathy, and this is very well studied. Matthew Ricard was the subject of many of these early studies that they performed with, also with scientific instruments, not just like psychological studies. Empathy is feeling other people's feelings. And it's very well understood from neuroscience and psychology. If someone just like punched you, I would feel awful right now. Oh my God, of course. And you feel it a little bit yourself too, like, ouch. That's empathy. And it's worse for what's going on in the news right now. You see like, children being killed and so on. That's empathy. But what do you do with those feelings? You can do many things with those feelings. They can totally overwhelm you. You can become depressed. You can try to shut them out, right? So you're just like, this is too much. I'm gonna go watch Netflix or get drunk or whatever, go for a walk even, right? I'm just gonna try to shut it out. There really isn't a way to process pure empathy on its own. It really does lead to overwhelm, either overwhelm or denial in human being psychology. So you need to move to compassion, which is wishing to take away that suffering. And it starts just with a wish. Like, who knows how it's going to happen? Like, we all have different wishes for our life. When we were younger, we wished to, graduate, go to college, meet a partner, and do something good with our life, etc. So this is the biggest wish you can have, which is wishing to take away everyone's suffering. So there's compassion, and then there's great compassion in Tibetan Buddhism, right? So compassion is wishing to take away someone's suffering as you see it. Then as you get, even kind of wiser and more educated, you're like, ooh, it's everybody actually. Everyone is suffering in big and subtle ways, and then wishing to take that away. And then you take the next step if you're brave enough, which is like, it's going to be me. I've got to be responsible for this, because that wish could be like, okay, someone's got to take away this suffering. But then you think, okay, I need to be some part of the cause for taking away this suffering. And you ask a very good question, because then what is that I? Because if you really do believe in a separate I, then that becomes not just a subtle, quite a large obstacle to helping others, because then ego arises and you start to think, not only am I separate, but also I'm more important. You see this, sadly, you see this with people doing wonderful things in the world. And I think we can all think of examples of people who did wonderful things in the world, and yet their ego kind of got a hold of them. So then they start arguing with other people trying to do good. This is one of the saddest things about people trying to do good in the world. It's because of a sense of separateness and ego. You start to fight with someone who's trying to do something a slight variation on your good, and you get mad at them because you think they're wrong. And then also people taking advantage of reputation. When I can think of certain activists, when they became very successful, then they start taking advantage of their situation to like sleep with many partners and, expand their own ego, reputation, and so on. So that's like a poison. That's seen like, that kind of ego is seen like a poison. And the antidote are these meditations to just think, where is that guy or gal or person? Where is that person? You start searching for it. Like, am I in is that guy who feels more important? Am I in my head, in my heart, am I in my spleen, in my liver? Like, it sounds ridiculous, but doing this process actually starts to make you see how ridiculous it is to believe there is that separate self. And then you start thinking about your mind. Oh, maybe it's in my mind. But where? It's not separate. It's not separate from my brain. Like, most people don't believe there's some separate soul or anything. So then you think about the neurological activity and all the things you learn, to the way you learn from other people. And you search and search and search. And in general, you don't find it, I mean, you have to try for yourself. Don't just believe it. But you search for that guy who seems more important or less important, and you don't find them. And then there's like a wonderful feeling of liberation. Like, wow, like somehow I function, I'm able to have conversations, I'm able to be beneficial. And yet I don't need that core. I don't need that hardcore who's doesn't even exist and actually causes me all my problems and poisons the good I even try to do in life. That's a elaboration.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Want to just suss out just another little nuance. There's the notion of empathy, both in terms of like your example, if someone were to punch me and how you might feel for me about that, from a feeling perspective. And I also understand too that there's frames of empathy around thinking, namely, what are their thoughts? How are they thinking about the world? Trying to understand that. And then, as I understood it, particularly with the metaphor of how the Dalai Lama has explained it about when you're hiking on the mountain and you see the person on the side. Do you know this story? I would imagine. No,
I will
don't know this?
maybe continue.
Probably. Anyway, so the way His Holiness had explained it at one point is the difference between empathy and compassion is the difference when you're hiking along a mountain trail and you might see somebody on the side of the trail with a boulder on their chest, and you walk up to them and say, "Oh my goodness, that boulder must be so heavy. Your ribs must be crushed right now, and you must be having difficulty breathing, and that must hurt," and so forth. And that's empathy. But then when you step up and push the boulder off of the chest and take the action of actively trying to alleviate the other suffering, that's the beginning of compassion, as I understood it. So that's been my frame of reference, just based on my learning. But what I'm curious to know for you is it sounds like there might be another space in there around moving from pure empathy in the sense of feeling or thinking or understanding people's thoughts or feelings to compassion in the sense of wishing them benefit, namely that intention that arises that says, as a non-separate entity, ideally, that, oh, I have a fellow human being that's in pain, and I wish that their pain would be alleviated. And then maybe there's another step that says, now I'm going to go walk and push that boulder off. So I'm curious to know if you could help me,
Yeah,
how you see that. And
so yeah, there's a kind of formula. There's like a prayer in general, like most of us who are Tibetan Buddhists do every day. And so with, I won't go through all the details, but there's one step of it which is compassion. And so there's basically like four steps. So first you say how wonderful it would be if that war ended today, right? So they would just, it would be really nice, right? Like that's really constructive. Then you think, may that happen. Like, okay, may that actually happen, right? That's step two. It's just like it'd be great if it happened. I wish that it really would happen. Then I've got to be a cause for that to happen. However, not exaggerated, but however I can in whatever small or big ways. Then the last step is like, okay, I need some help. It's like, and in our tradition, you think of your gurus like, oh, may my gurus bless me and help me. For in a secular perspective, you'd think, okay, I gotta educate myself. I need some help. I need some mentors. I need teachings. I need whatever it is for you that's gonna help you be more effective in the world. Um, I've got to go pursue that. So it's like these four steps. It's every Tibetan Buddhism is very much elaborated into these like multi-step mental processes. But that's the one for these different steps of cultivating compassion gradually. And they also say it's optional. It's not you're not required to do all these things. There's an ideal called a bodhisattva, which is a person who takes the bodhisattva vow, which again Jim alluded to in a beautiful introduction, that you have this aspiration to attain enlightenment, to basically eliminate all your negative qualities, cultivate all your best qualities so that you can benefit everybody. Everybody you encounter, everybody in the world, everyone in the universe, if there are beings in other places. Um, yeah. There's one other thing I want to mention. This is actually a great conversation. It's different than all the other ones I've done because you jumped right to the most advanced topics. Usually everything stays in just the first one or two earlier topics. But I want to rewind to one of the very earliest topics that's relevant to this, which is the fundamental goodness of the mind. Because you might say, how do you do this? Aren't there evil people and good people and everything in between? And this explains why this process works, is that from a Buddhist perspective, that is backed up by science. It says that people are fundamentally good. That at our heart, we all have the same needs for safety, security, love, um, food, wealth, etc. And these qualities like kindness, generosity, compassion, love, wisdom, they're natural. And that they just get covered. I mean, it seems like you can be like totally frustrated, totally angry, totally craving. But from the Buddhist perspective, it's very shallow. It's still the shallowest level of your psyche, your consciousness. And if you're able to go deeper into your consciousness, which is really what meditation is for, all of a sudden you discover, wow, this is a beautiful person underneath those like disturbing thoughts, like negative self-talk, things like that a lot of us have. Um, you can touch this fundamental goodness, which in Buddhism they call Buddha nature, which I don't think is a good. All of the things from Buddhism called the Buddha would never have called Buddhism. He just called it the truth, really, the truth about reality. So he certainly wouldn't have said it's Buddha nature. It's just our fundamental goodness. So that's the reason that these techniques work, is that we each naturally have these good qualities that we can cultivate, they say, to an infinite degree, that there's no limit to the amount of love, compassion, kindness, generosity, patience, and so on a person can embody.
Yeah, picking up on that point, much of the conversation this morning has been on compassion for others, but can you speak a bit more to self-compassion?
Yeah, it's impossible to have compassion without self-compassion, and you have to start with yourself. And everybody I know who's gone on very long retreats, like many months or years, they all describe it the same way, as becoming their own best friend.
Mm.
That they go through quite a rough process of, negative self-talk, like remembering kind of everything that they did that they regret, and then forgiving themselves for it. So that's another one of the chapters, in Buddhism we call it purification, but I call it self-forgiveness, which is the kind of essential step to self-compassion. Almost all of the stages in Buddhism relate to self-compassion because they're gradually kind of getting to know and love yourself, which sadly, like many, maybe most people don't feel that way. And so you do it's actually the same meditations, but you do it you actually visualize yourself in front of yourself and then think of yourself as your own best friend. How would I treat me if I was my best friend? Right. And they told me the thing, like say the one thing you did yesterday that you regret. And you'd say like, oh, come on, you're such a good person. You know, you do so much good. And like, think about all those nice things you did. You made breakfast for your daughter. You did this, that. You listened to your friend. You gave some money to this cause you believed in. Um, you know, look at all the great relationships in your life, the hundreds of people you've benefited, and your good motivation. Even when you do something wrong, generally it's just like a mistake. It's an act. You know, like we're not perfect, and you try to do something good. So think like talk to yourself as if you talk to your own best friend. You know, you need to like like put your arm around yourself. That's the meditation. Like that's the thing with analytical meditation, though. There's not a shortcut. You actually have to go into detail every time. After a long time, it does become spontaneous. But in general, you have to go into all this elaborate detail. Like, how would I treat myself if I was my own best friend? And then there's specific rituals too for self-forgiveness, you know, and then we usually do this every day, is just think about the things, all the great things you did during the day and rejoice. Just think like go on and on and on and on if you can with all the good things you did. Then think about the things you regret and how you would have rather acted, and do that in your mind. Like act out, okay, next time I want to say this, I would have said this. Like this is how we want to act in the future. There's a couple other steps to it, but you know that's one of the core practices of self-compassion is you know, this constant rejoicing and letting go, so that you can remain present and happy and compassionate for the people around you.
Well, not to, unless you want to engage in a conversation on emptiness, I'm wondering how you reconcile the self-compassion with the sense that there's no separate self, and
So
how
yeah, so the thing is to try to understand what the self really is. Like, it's not nihilism, right? Like, of course we're here, we're talking to each other, and we have agency. You know, we can decide what next to do after this call and like what we want to do with our day. Um, it's just that the way you exist is more subtle and much more beautiful than you think. That in general, the way we think we exist is separate, strong, solid, often more important or less important than others. You know, there's this mental factor called arrogance or pride, but it's actually both dimensions. It's thinking I'm inferior to others or thinking I'm superior to others, when really it's equanimity. Like the antidote is equanimity, to feel the sense of universal human rights, universal respect for humanity. Um, so to try to understand, I mean, it's a lifelong, you know, Tibetans would say multi-lifelong process. I've been practicing for 25 years, and I have to say, you know, every year, like it unfolds I don't have, you know, realization of this concept, but you do gradually grow a little bit, and you start to see like the self is actually this tumbling collection of parts. It's quite beautiful and interacting. Like you don't need the controller. They say it's like a pilot, you know, the pilot of a plane or the captain of a ship, or like there isn't that captain and pilot's not there in your mind. Science has never seen it. Like it doesn't exist scientifically or psychologically or through self-inquiry. So when it comes up, just search for it. Like, where is that guy who feels more important, less important? And we learn very specific ways to do this. Like there's very specific ways to do it that are quite effective. But there is a self, and we call it a merely labeled self. So that we're just merely labeled on top of our collection of body and mind, on top of these, like we can see how many physical parts there are to our body. There's no core to our physical body. It's the same with psychologically, mentally, or neurologically, if you want to say. There's all these different parts functioning in your mind, and yet it doesn't have a controller, and it doesn't need a controller. And when you think there is a controller, that is just the source of all your nightmare problems, all the psychological problems, all the physical problems, all the awful things do in the world, all the awful things people do in the world. The root of it is that sense of separateness and a sense of a controller is very, very poisonous idea of this like separate, independent self, and it doesn't even exist.
Scott, how does the question of agency then come forward relative to that? Because there is, as I understand it, and as I understand emptiness in particular, we make choice at one level, right? Our intentions that arise in terms of what motivates us to act is in part, a big part of what we're trying to, I don't want to use the word monitor, but what we're trying to reorient towards goodness and kindness, as opposed to orient towards harm, be it to self, be it to other, to the earth, whatever it might be. But just that interplay of saying that there is an observer, or not an observer, but there's an awareness of action, intention, expression of will at one level, but yet and there is no controller. Can you help to unpack that for me for a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that I understand it and I experience it, and when I experience this in a constructive way, it is so subtle because really the things that we do are conditioned. Like I think the way that I respond in everyday life and most people respond, it's conditioned. So the Buddhist view, as I understand it, is quite subtle, which is that it's actually more that time on the cushion that's very, very important of picturing situations and in which you didn't respond in a way that you wanted to, and then imagining responding the way you want to. Picturing these things like having compassion for all beings, understanding impermanence. Like it's very, very odd because I think what you need to do is build these habits. You need to be in a quiet place and build these constructive ways of thinking. Or when you're walking down the street, ways of like repeating over and over, like with the mantra, if you're Buddhist, or other ways that you learn, like the techniques in the book, and many different things of contemplating impermanence, the precious life, and so on. And those habits then cause you to respond more constructively later. So it's quite that's how I would honestly answer that question, is that almost everything we do is kind of conditioned, but meditation and analytical meditation and other constructive ways of reflecting change your spontaneous responses so that they're beneficial. Mindfulness would say that, you have a choice, that with mindfulness, you can like become aware of what you're doing at the moment and then have a conscious choice of how to respond. And I don't find that to be true all the time, actually. I really think it's more the conditioning. Like, I do think that is possible, but that's not how I see my own mind, and also the mind of like more highly realized people that I see. I see them more creating the earlier conditions, like creating so much of a conducive bed of a healthy mind through meditation and other types of reflection. And then their spontaneous actions become so beneficial without even thinking about it. So thank you for asking that question, because I have thought about that a lot, and I really do think it is more about cultivating our mind so it responds spontaneously in a constructive way, rather than that mindfulness. That mindfulness approach is very, very difficult. And also it takes you out of the moment, because then you're not there responding. You're sort of like thinking about the situation, but you really need to be present for the situation. So they both work together, but that's the kind of what I understand from my teachers and some of my own experience.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm don't want to, parse too hard. And at the same time, I do find that it's fascinating, because at some point in time, if one is in a state that sees and experiences harm, one will perpetuate at one level or make choice, or they will continue to experience harm, kind of regardless of the philosophical nuance of that and how that, may or may not work. But at the same time, the gradual movement towards non-harm and towards then making choice to say, I'm going to be to join a podcast with a fabulous author named Scott Snibbe to be able to learn better practices, for instance. So that's a choice that's made by everyone that's here watching and participating. So how do we, again, I just find it interesting in terms of how we continue to choose non-suffering, and then which then leads to greater non-suffering, and then ultimately to even bringing greater benefit to others. I don't have the answer by any means, and I appreciate your answer, and something I've been fascinated with for many, many years. So, if you ever get the memo, let me know.
Yeah. Well, something has to go through our heads all day long. I mean, there's meditation, very, very important. Not for everybody though. But then something has to be going through our heads all the time. And that's what, like these analytical meditations from How to Train a Happy Mind, like those are the things, like what can you fill your mind with when you're walking down the street, when you're eating, and so on. There's all these beautiful practices, like a practice of universalizing, for example, is one of the most powerful ones, where what do you do as you're eating a meal that's delicious, right? Often you're saying like, yeah, this is delicious. But you can actually turn that into a practice of compassion. Like every bite, you think, may everybody in the world have a delicious meal like this. Or
Yeah.
something hard happens to you, like say your boss is yelling at you, giving you negative feedback, or falsely criticizing you. That's one of the best ones. Then you think, oh my God, this happened to me recently, actually, like being falsely criticized or falsely accused of something. And so then you think, oh my God, there are people on death row who didn't do the crime. There's people falsely imprisoned. There's people just living their lives in the country getting bombed who are, totally innocent, totally kind. Like that. So your little problem, or maybe big problem, you use that to generate compassion too. So like that's the power of analytical meditation, is eventually to transform every single thing that happens into your life into a cause for generating compassion. So that's why, and this technique isn't that well known or taught. So that's why I was really wanted to include it in the book. I call it universalizing, a way of turning every single experience you have in life, however trivial, however harmful, however beneficial, into a way to expand your compassion.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It reminds me of a practice that Bill Dwayne mentioned to me at one point, is the just like me, right? So you can, especially when you see folks who are unhoused, or who might be in a state of anger or whatever it might be, just like me, they would love to be in a warm bed. Just like me, they would love to have access to food and feel love and so forth. And it's a great way to, very simply, to your point, my words, is to move the center from self to center in other, be it other people or in the earth or what have you, but that constant movement away from the reification of self, as opposed to walking around with your cell phone, taking selfies all the time.
Yeah. And here's one way to take that practice even further. Okay. As you see that unhoused person, imagine giving them the keys to your home. You don't have to actually do it. But even thinking now, isn't it funny how hard that seems to do, even just imagining it?
Yeah, that's a
Right?
great point.
So
Well,
imagine handing them the keys. You don't have to do it. You could say, I will not going to do this. But just imagine handing them the keys to your home and saying, take my home. I'll keep paying the rent or mortgage or whatever. You live there. Or maybe we live together, maybe. I don't know. But like that's taking it to the next level, right? What you said is very, very beneficial. And then there's this and then of course for very advanced people, then they start doing things like that. But they advise, in the Buddhist path, there's amazing stories of the Buddha, feeding his body to tigers and things like that. Not do not do this at home. Those are very advanced techniques for, very highly realized practitioners. But trying just to imagine it. Just try that, imagining giving it. Try it today. I think we're all probably going to see an unhoused person today. Imagine handing them the keys to your apartment and how happy they would be, living there.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you for that. And that's something I will take for myself. That's wonderful. Tom, anything for you right now, or?
Yeah, there are so many things that are coming up in this conversation. I'm reminded of the relational therapist Terrence Real and some of his books. His book on Us, he uses a 2x2 matrix with the vertical axis being what he calls grandiosity, one up, one down, and the horizontal axis is about boundaries and boundarylessness. And he encourages the users of that framework to just try to arrive at the center, where you're not in a position of taking a place of grandiosity, but you can actually have compassion and empathy for the other, and to arrive at a place of recognizing there's no separate self, but honoring the other. And much of what we've been talking about is finding that place of wisdom and compassion. And it's a great framework for thinking about what we've been speaking to, at least in relationship with other. So that's alive in me as you've been talking. The other is as a longtime Buddhist practitioner myself, I so appreciate the way that you're taking these, centuries old teachings, Scott, and bringing them into contemporary language and contemporary framework. And just really am struck by how you've been able to language it in the way that you have.
That's kind of you to say. Thanks. Yeah, a lot of it's the inspiration of my teachers and friends and meditation students, just wanting to make things work for people and pass on wisdom that was very, very hard to learn in very authentic ways in a long span of time, and just distill it into something practical. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think of the Galupa tradition in particular. It's so academic. It's so extraordinary in the approach and understanding of the nature of consciousness, and to be able to translate that complexity into stories, into ways of being able to make it accessible to the average consumer, average person, is wonderful. So it's a huge thank you to you for the ability to do that.
Sure, sure. And thanks to, the Dalai Lama, Dalai Lama said, give up religion, go beyond religion. Put these teachings into scientific term. My teacher, Lama Yeshe, also, who founded my tradition. So it's a big goal of at least the Tibetan Buddhist lineage, to open up these teachings to everybody. I have this quote, Geshe Namdak, a great teacher in London, one of the few Western geshes. He said, the purpose of Buddhism is not to make more Buddhists. It is to create happy minds. So,
Amazing.
that's the point of it. It's not to expand the number of religious adherents to Buddhism.
Tell them, if you would, the listeners, the actual structure of your book. Like, if you were to pick up the book, what would one experience?
So the book is divided into these, 8 topics. And ideally, if a person has the time, you could spend, say, a week with each one. That's how I learned it. In fact, we spent 6 weeks with each one. And they can really, really filter into you. That's what they say it takes to learn a new habit, is like 6 weeks, 8 weeks or something. So for these ideas that, like, when you hear them, an idea like impermanence, right? So when we look at each other, we tend to see each other as kind of permanent. Like, okay, Carson, is this certain type of person, and Tom is another type of person. So you go through these exercises. This is actually one of the most powerful exercises I've found in the book, that I often, do as readings when I do talks, is that to try to understand the impermanence of people, when I look at you, Carson, try to think of the moment you were born. So think, wow, your mother, like the pain she went through, the joy, who else was there? Like, that was maybe certainly one of the most significant moments of her life, right? And of yours. Then to think of your death. You're going to die one day, hopefully not soon, but it could happen, hopefully in a long time, surrounded by friends, maybe alone, maybe surrounded by family. A lot of people love you, so you probably have a lot of people around.
Very kind.
But and then you're somewhere in that arc right now. Like, you're somewhere along the heroic arc of your life. I know a lot about you, so I can think a lot about this. But to do that for everybody, including strangers, as you're walking down the street, every single person especially people who annoy you too, like if someone's bothering you or you're in a conflict, think, ooh, the moment they were born, they're gonna die. And there's somewhere along the arc of what I call the hero's journey. I call this meditation the hero's journey in the book. And I think it's one of the most effective meditations on impermanence. It just humanizes everybody, even for, leaders you hate in the world, to think, ooh, they're on the arc of their life too. They were born, they have a mother that loves them, they're gonna die. Like, what did they want out of life when they were young? You know, did they were they planning to be a tyrant? Were they hoping to be a tyrant as a little toddler? You know, what causes made them be that way? Like this is a really extraordinary way to generate compassion. But you see kind of compassion ends up filtering into every topic when you really see it. Impermanence, it's one of the first topics of Buddhism. And you do it with objects too. You know, you think of when you see a bicycle, you think, ooh, that paint, the aluminum came from Jamaica. You know, most aluminum comes from Jamaica. Like you think of all the places it came from, and the bike's eventually going to be destroyed and so on. So you start to see, even like this very early topic, you see how it transforms how you see reality if you think about it enough. Because as you go around, reality doesn't look like solid and momentary like it is right now. You actually see like you naturally start to see the whole arc of Carson's life. You start to see the whole arc of your phone, you know, this thing is like so important to me. Like I freak out when I'm parted from it for a second, my phone. And then you think, oh, wait, somebody made this and all the different. In fact, it contains 75 out of the like 85 naturally occurring elements. This is like almost every element in the universe is in this. Where did it come from? Who made it? How did it come together? There was suffering involved in the people who created it. And I'm going to be sick of it in a couple, like, in a couple years, I'm going to be sick of it. It's going to be slow. The battery won't work. There'll be something more exciting. Anyway, we can go on. But you see, I kind of, every topic I try to elaborate because that's the way you do these meditations. It's not light. You actually try to go quite deep in your reflection with each of the topics. But eventually it does result in a kind of instantaneous feeling of, you know, like seeing Carson and seeing like the whole arc of your life as we're talking to each other. And you have a much nicer conversation and a warmer feeling in your heart when you see people that way in general.
Mhm. Any other topics in the book?
Um, well, there are, you know, there's 8 topics. There's a kind of preamble topic, which is the mind, you know, which is very important because if you say that meditation brings out your mind's best qualities, then of course you start to wonder what is the mind. And so that's the very first, it's like the introductory topic before the 8 stages is to understand the mind. I mentioned the kind of coolest aspect of the mind, which is that we're all fundamentally good, which is utterly mind-blowing and very beautiful and supported by scientific evidence. You know, there's books like Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers and so on that talk about, you know, the natural. Only humans can kind of work ourselves up about things that haven't happened, things that will never happen, you know, things, and then exaggerate the harm from small things that bothered us. Um, but there's an important aspect of also understanding mental factors, you know, that you can actually break cognition down into this kind of 5 steps. I hesitated before doing this because it comes even before the steps, but it's very, very important. And the people who've read the book have said it's very beneficial to start to see. This helps you to see what is that self that you're talking about, right? So Buddhism actually breaks mental experience into 5 factors of contact, like senses make contact with something. Then perception, which is we wrap all this like many different perceptions together into Carson or into phone or so on, but it's actually many, many different mental experiences. So perception wraps a multitude of sensory perceptions into one object or idea. Then attention, we pay more attention to some things than another, which is very interesting to see what your mind goes to, what it doesn't. And then feeling, which is that of all of that wrapped up collection of perceptions, we either feel, oh, this feels good, this feels bad, or kind of neutral, like I don't care. Positive, negative, or neutral. That's emotion in Buddhism is simpler. It's actually just this positive, negative, or neutral. And then you have urge, which is the last one, is that based on all of that, then you want to do something or you do something. So it's very, very powerful to learn how your mind works according to this model, because you can start to take apart mental experience. And then you kind of see that that's all you are. You actually are these 5 interrelating mental factors. Like in one way of looking at yourself, that's all you are. Is just the interaction. There's what else? There's nothing outside of those things. There's just these different mental factors interacting. So anyway, I think that was another nice topic to bring up, because I really, really debated whether to bring in this topic, which is generally the preamble to the stages of the path. And I'm really glad I found a very, very simplified way of doing it, but I'm glad I did, because in general, people say it works for them, even before you get to the first topic, which is how precious life is. So, so that's the next one, is like you wake up in the morning and you think, whoa, I've got another day to live. What am I going to do with this? I'm at the like pinnacle of evolution. It's extraordinary how long it took for, self-aware life to evolve on this planet. And I have some amount of resources, safety, security. What am I going to do with this day? What can I accomplish with this day? Thich Nhat Hanh calls it, 24 precious hours to live. What a precious gift, right?
Mhm. Beautiful. Well, I want to be mindful of the time. We could go on and on and on. Tom, do you have anything else that you'd like to speak to at this point?
I was just going to ask Scott if you could share those 5 again. So it was
Oh, sure.
contact.
And it's in the book. It's in the book. But it's they're called the omnipresent mental factors, but it's sense contact, then perception. There's different words. Sometimes they say discrimination, but discrimination doesn't have a nice, other meaning. So I like perception is how you wrap many sense phenomena into the illusion of an object. Attention, that we pay more attention to the others, one thing than the other. Feeling's the most important one, positive, negative, or neutral, because that's where you can stop or slow down they say like these 5 things, it's just about automatic. This relates to Carson's earlier question. They say these 5 mental factors, it's just like bam, it just happens automatically in your mind. But if you can become aware of feeling, your positive, negative, or neutral, really spontaneous response to things, that's where you can gain control of your mind and choose whether or not to follow that. The last one is urge, which again, they use a word like volition, mental formation, like words that I don't think are very understandable to ordinary people. So I use a word from a teacher I really respect, who uses this term urge, which I think is an excellent English word for this mental factor of either wanting to do something or actually doing something about that cascade of, the 4 other mental factors.
The last thing I'll ask, and it's a possibly a dangerous question, but you've throughout this conversation you've referenced the mind, and how do you distinguish the mind from the skull brain? Because for most people it's synonymous.
Yeah. I talk a lot in the book, and it's a part of the book people really enjoy. So a big part of my life, I studied computer science. I make art with computers. It's a long story, but here's how I approach that topic. Is that some people say the mind is immaterial, and it kind of comes into a body and goes out, and there's different approaches with different religions, spiritual traditions. Setting that aside, whether or not that's true, if you don't believe those things, then still, what is the relationship of the mind to the brain? There's wonderful scientists like Anil Seth looking into this right now, who wrote Being You. And even among those scientists, there is a sense that the mind is not the brain, that there are immaterial things. And the mind can be immaterial without being supernatural. And here's a couple practical questions that will help you come to hopefully see that this is true. Do you believe in math? Everybody, I think, would say we believe in math. But where is math? Is there a math detector? Can we detect where math is and where math isn't? Is it in the pages of a textbook? Is it in nature? No, there's no physical mathematics, but every one of us believes in it and benefits from. In fact, this entire conversation on Zoom is taking part due to math. Every single little bit, it's all mathematics making this conversation happen. So we believe in math. It's immaterial. You can't point to it anywhere. Then I also like to say, do you believe in love? Most of us have felt love of our parents, love to our partner. Where's that? Where's the love detector? Can you point a little detector that starts beeping when someone's expressing true love or feeling true love? No, we all believe in love. It's not material. Love is not material. There's no place. It's not in the little red heart emoji on your phone. It's not in a love letter or the words I love you. But it's a real thing. I also like to make the analogy to software, like computer software, because I'm a studied computer science, you know. Software isn't material either. It's like kind of like constantly changing it. It's not in the lines of code. It's not in the computer hardware. Like no one would mistake, like this is not Instagram. My phone is not Instagram. My phone's not the email program, but the email program runs on it. Is that material? No, same. So there's so many things we can point to that are immaterial that we believe in. It doesn't have to be supernatural. The mind is like that too. It's immaterial. You can say it's immaterial, constantly changing information that is utterly dependent on the brain, interdependent with the brain in ways that we don't fully understand yet. But it's not a big deal to say the mind's immaterial. Not at all. You don't have to get all supernatural about it.
Thank you, Scott.
Sure.
Why don't we bring Jim back in to help close out the day?
Yeah, and as he arrives, I do want to just put in one plug for Scott outside of the book. There is some discussion about Scott's upcoming retreat in Santa Cruz Mountains. That'll be happening August, I believe, 8th through 11th at the Vajrapani Retreat Center. So come one, come all. I think there was a person that said that she's planning on coming and maybe bringing her child. I'm not sure.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a unique opportunity. And I've been developing this over many years and courses. So this is the first time we'll do it as a 3-day retreat, go through all the topics, and and I make it fun, you know. It's also fun and entertaining. So yeah, if people have time, that should be a very nice time.
I'm planning on being there. So
Oh, wonderful.
I look forward to it.
Great.
All right. Thank you, Scott, and over to Jim.
Thank you, Carson. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Scott. What a wonderful program. I deeply appreciate the nuances that you're bringing to words that have become commonplace. And I think one of the gifts that you have is to reanimate some of these ancient concepts in new ways, particularly for seekers who've been on the path and are looking for that next level of refinement. So thank you so much. I want to shift to a completely different subject, but which I think is on the minds of certainly all the Buddhists and the Tibetan Buddhists and in fact the world community, and that is the Dalai Lama. And his age, I think what is he, 89 now?
Yeah, I just turned 89.
He's 89. The Chinese government is maneuvering for his next incarnation. The Dalai Lama has been ambiguous. The Tibetan community, I think, is sort of on edge and wondering what is going to come to pass. It raises the whole question of reincarnation, and in particular, the reincarnation of a Dalai Lama. And would love to just have you comment on sort of your understanding of reincarnation and any insights you could provide to our community about the politics or the transitional intrigue that is beginning, I'm sure, intensify in Dharamsala.
Sure. So first of all, just about reincarnation, you know, there's of course in Tibetan Buddhism, there's the conviction that, you know, we do have some type of a continuity of mind that goes from lifetime to lifetime. And for ordinary people, you can't really choose. You just sort of jump into the first body you find. For someone like the Dalai Lama, they say they can choose. But, you know, even the Dalai Lama has said they don't always choose right. Like, and he said he points to specific ones. He's like, definitely the 5th, definitely the 13th, you know. But he says politics sometimes got in the way and they chose the wrong person. So it's really interesting to see this, right? That it's just like any other process involving human beings, there can become politics. So what the Dalai Lama has said is that he's definitely not going to be incarnated in China if it's under communist rule, that he'll be reborn somewhere else. He's also talked about ending. He's actually really cute what he says, because he actually says like, I'm the best Dalai Lama. He's laughing, but it's actually sort of factually true. That's the funny thing is you can have like a huge personality, but no ego, which is what the Dalai Lama said. So he actually said, maybe it's good to end the lineage with me since I'm the best one, which is very, very cute. Um, but he may be reborn in another country. He's talked about being reborn as a woman. He's also talked about choosing a successor before he dies. So he talked about a lot of different innovations to the tradition. And yeah, the Chinese government, while on the one point saying we don't believe in any religion, we don't believe in reincarnation, then they've also passed a law that they will choose. They're the ones that can choose the reincarnations. Sadly, they've done it with the Karmapa or the Panchen Lama, which is kind of the second, kind of the alternate to the Dalai Lama. You can think of it that way. And they kidnapped the the one that was determined by Tibetan Buddhist lineage. They call him the youngest political prisoner in the world, although he's not that young. It's really sad. Then China appointed a separate one who's a kind of a puppet Panchen Lama. So that's what they'll probably try to do when the Dalai Lama eventually dies, hopefully quite long from now. So it's complicated. It's a complicated story. I just articulated all of the different options that the Dalai Lama has talked about over time.
And speak to us a little bit more about your general notion of reincarnation
Yeah.
in Buddhist tradition, say, for example, in contrast to the Hindu tradition, where there's more of an emphasis on the continuity of the self.
Mm.
The Buddhists have always had this conundrum of how does the non-self move into the next life with continuity. Would just
Yeah.
have your sense of
Yeah.
reincarnation, since it's so foundational to the
Yeah.
Asian religious
Yeah.
tradition.
So, full disclosure, which I often say at the beginning, is that even though I wrote this book for people who don't believe all those seemingly supernatural things, in general, I believe all those seemingly supernatural things. But it's taken some time. I think with reincarnation, many of the ways I've come to believe in reincarnation is knowing someone who died, then meeting their reincarnation, as they grow older. Like that's or with it's the Dalai Lama. Like, how could he be lying about being such an extraordinary person? But it's true, I think at least a decade of experience, then you think, oh, how could this not be true with all of both a bit of the evidence and also, how could such compassionate, wise beings be lying? But yeah, in terms of what is it that reincarnates, it's so, so subtle. I think everything we think of ordinarily as our personality, our soul, our essence is not the thing that continues. In Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about it as this very, very subtle continuity. Like there's like a gross mind, which is like we're experiencing right now. There's a kind of subtle mind. Then there's a very subtle mind. And those of you who've studied Tibetan Buddhism know there's these three things. And you can touch them in meditation. You can, in general, there's ways to touch them or touch a simulacrum of them. And they say that's what continues. But it's not a solid thing. That is the difference between Hinduism, is they do believe in like a solid, separate, independent Atman. That is refuted from the Buddhist perspective, and it's quite hard to say what it is. It's easier to say what it isn't. That it's an extremely subtle, constantly changing continuity of mental factors with an extraordinarily beautiful ground, which they sometimes call like the clear light mind, like this kind of beautiful interdependent clarity, like unseparateness. But there is something different between people. The Dalai Lama said every single person becomes enlightened in their own way. So you don't just merge. That is the view sometimes from certain Hindu perspectives, also certain Buddhist perspectives, that you merge and you kind of lose yourself completely. That's not the Tibetan Buddhist view. You do maintain a continuity, individuality. So the words can just hint at the experience. I don't have, that direct realization, but that's some of how I understand how to explain it a little bit.
Mhm. And I know, Tom, you've meditated quite deeply on these matters of reincarnation, given your spiritual background. How do you understand reincarnation?
Yeah, I've had personal experiences with it. My teacher, he and I have shared stories about his experiences of us being together in prior lifetimes in monastery, and having, very real memories of those experiences. When my wife passed away, he helped her through, and many monks helped her through the bardo. And he called me when she reincarnated to let me know she came back as a human and was with a really good family. And my experiences when she was in the bardo, I and my children had connections with her during that time. So I have personal experiences with it. I think the other piece that's alive for me is I've heard, not directly from His Holiness, but from other people, say that His Holiness has said he will not be coming back, but the next Buddha will be the Sangha, or the community. And when I think about, in a very real way, and not to bring politics into this conversation, but when I think about, the state of the US political scene right now, and I think about, the reality is the president doesn't run this country. It's a whole team of people. And we're faced with a decision in November about who is the team that we're electing. And there's a lot of conversations right now about Joe Biden and the state of his health and his mental acuity, and certainly former President Trump's mental acuity. And we look at who are they surrounded by. And so in the context of not reincarnation per se, but the next leader being the Sangha, who is the Sangha that we want in charge? Who is the community? And so a bit off topic, but it's very much alive for me. And I think in the world today is in the context of the next Dalai Lama. I think in some way he speaks to that, about the importance of no self and the importance of community.
And it exemplifies the deep, intimate relationship between politics and spirituality going on in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition around the passage, because in some ways everything is at stake. And so just bearing witness to what's going to happen will be a very, very fascinating unfolding. So thank you for that. Carson, any closing comments you'd like to make on this, and then tee us up for tomorrow?
Sure. Not too much to add. I will second what Tom was speaking to about the notion of the Maitreya Buddha, the Buddha of love, that next Buddha coming as a group of people. That is just such an incredibly profound framework for me, at least, to think that full realization would come as a collective. And it really feels like if in fact that is true, which I believe to be true, I believe that we're also seeing patterns of that as a concept showing up now in a lot of the advanced work that's happening with a variety of different organizations and just different relationships. I think fundamentally we're moving from that Cartesian sense of self as an individuated entity with choice and so forth, and really moving into a space of understanding, no, it's more quantum, we're in more relationship, and I exist because you exist, and so forth. Not to say that, we don't have individual experience. So I would just add to that. And I think, again, to the political side of it, particularly in this country, I think it becomes incredibly important to understand which Sanghic direction we want to go in terms of what manifestation will be showing up for us, after the presidential election in this year. We are at a very pivotal direction, and I'm hoping we can choose benefit as opposed to choosing harm, because I do believe that's, at one level, that's what we're confronted with. Not to say that both parties are perfect or both parties don't have benefit, but that's what it feels like to me. So I'll just leave that there. On that note, tomorrow we're going to be speaking with an extraordinary person named Jay Vidyarthi, who has done, excuse me, a lot of work, or I should say focused work, on bringing compassionate and mindfulness products into the world. And he continues to write a Substack article called the Attention Activist. So he's very much concerned about how we bring our focus and our attention to positive and beneficial things, and the importance of how that continues to be challenged by, say, Instagram or other sorts of social media, or just other things that are clamoring for our attention, and how that impacts us. So he's also a very experienced meditation practitioner and also a teacher as well. So he's just a wonderful man. Really, really looking forward to it. So that's tomorrow.
Thank you. Scott, why don't you just give us a blessing as we bring this session to a close?
Oh, sure. So, we've all changed through the course of this conversation, and this was such a beneficial conversation. We've each developed our compassion, our wisdom, our understanding of impermanence, our ability to see the full arc of other people's lives. All of these things have measurably increased in each of us through this conversation. So it's nice just to rejoice and to recognize that we all did something really wonderful with this last hour and a half, and to make the aspiration that that continuity continues, that throughout this day, some of the ideas that resonated with each of us come to mind as we're talking to other people, as we're making decisions about what to do and not to do. And that the merit, as I say in Buddhism, from all of these beneficial activities will continue to propel us through the course of our entire life, and even future lives, if you believe in those, to become our best self and to be a power for good in the world, to build constructive, deep relationships, to make the world a better place and help the big problems of war, environmental destruction, general selfishness, that each of us could be a cause for making the world a better place. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
So that'll bring us to a close for today, everyone. You can join Scott in the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. You also received it in your Zoom reminder for today. And then tomorrow, as Carson said, we'll conclude with our fifth and final session on Compassion 2.0. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Carson. Scott, brilliant. Well done.
Thank you. I really
everyone.
enjoyed that. Thank you
Bye,
very much.
everyone.
Take
See you
care.
soon in the after chat.